you've heard what van der Leyen said in her speech about a union and a grid more connected. We've heard in the kind of Draghi reports and the letter reports about the importance for completing the single market, which also includes making sure that our grid is interoperable, but also more intelligent. Intelligent in terms of how do you sway supply and demand, locate it more effectively, and can national governments give up their sense of sovereignty, because part of it involves being able to say, I've got a bunch of energy here, have some of that, and we have to balance the cost, etc. But there's also the kind of different technologies that are involved individually in member states as to the capacity, prowess, efficacy, and resilience. But importantly, the resilience of our systems. We saw what happened in Spain and Portugal, but the critical issue here, and I think one thing that we have not spoken about a lot, is about security. And I think that that's the new frontier in terms of energy security. I don't mean just about supply. I mean, dodgy buggers playing with the system and cutting us off, or doing all sorts of stuff. And I think we have no idea at this stage, in the early stages, of what kind of planning and plotting is taking place to create systemic outages and to kind of, I suppose, rupture the resilience of our grid more widely. But let's not have that Armageddon scenario. But I feel as it's not Armageddon, because it's like kind of happening in different ways. Can I invite our speakers to join here, please?
Do we have number 6?
No, you can. Whilst they're watering themselves and getting themselves organized, there's one data point that kind of really shouted out at me, and which was this: 7.2 billion in renewable energy was wasted across just 7 countries in 2024 because it couldn't be accommodated by electricity grids. 7.2 billion, let me repeat that, 7.2 billion in renewable energy was wasted across just 7 countries in 2024 because it couldn't be accommodated by the grid system. There's many others, but what the cost of an outage is, we know is in the hundreds of millions, etc., and so forth. But I thought that was quite powerful, that when you're trying to get somewhere and it's already here in front of you, my goodness, go figure. The system just needs to make sure it's more adaptive and agile. Otherwise, we're just wasting all that renewable energy. So without further ado, we have this august panel here in front of you, mix of public, private, independent, etc. sectors. Good to have you back. This man's obviously going to, obviously raise the handle on various points, which I'm hoping that you're going to do, Bruno. But I'm going to start with, the fabulous Beatrix from Spain. Not only because, we're all wondering who did the dirty in Spain and Portugal. I know you don't want to answer that question, but I'm not going to look at you. But really, from a kind of a position of where you sit, what do you think needs to happen to improve our common lot? So, there's something that you do in Spain. How do we make sure that can be more connected? Because in von der Leyen's speech, when she talked about connectivity from, one end to the other end of Europe, the turf war between you and France, Spain and France, was, writ large, because only 2% of your productivity is linked to Europe, yet you do so well. So share with us some of that thinking about what you think should happen.
Thank you. Thank you to Friends of Europe for having me, and thank you, Metzgil and Jan-Christophe, because without EV and without DGNR, that interconnection that you are talking about would be impossible. And let me begin saying what is the company that I represent here doing is the so-called TSO system, transmission system operator. This is the model in which 22 out of 27 countries in the EU are managing their electrical systems. And what does it mean? It means if you compare the system with a body, then the TSO would be the brain and the backbone together. And then you have a heart that is the generators of energy, and then you have distributors and commercializers. But the backbone and the brain in the TSO model are together. And this is very important because the brain should give orders directly to the backbone to maintain the efficiency in costs, to maintain the security, and to assure that the deployment of the grids are not over-invested. Because we are a regulated company, our incomes don't come from the price of megawatt. Our incomes are regulators, but our regulator. So we only can do the infrastructures that the government set us to do, and with the price that our regulator mandates us to be paid for. So we are very efficient because this is the model that Europe has decided that is more efficient. That is saying that because when you talk about what we need as Europe for getting the targets that we have in order to achieve the goal of renewable energy into the mix of energy, 42.5%. If you look to Spain and Portugal, let me speak about Spain, we, in this year, 2025, we are integrating 59% of electricity coming from renewable sources. And if you look at our power plant, we have installed 64% of all our power plants are renewables. So it's possible to do it. So it can be achieved. Well, we need several things. Of course, we need interconnections with the rest of the continent. Because if you have a backbone in a country but is not connected to the backbone of other countries, then the competitiveness of the industry, to lower the prices of the energy should be not possible. For industry that is very intensive in energy, for data centers, and for AI, and for everything. So we need to be interconnected because we are a continent, just one continent. And let me say that here, in this room, I can feel the power of European people. We have the brain, we have the heart, we have the power, we have the energy, enthusiasm. So we can do it as a continent. And I feel very, very, very proud to be European. And please take advantage of what happened in the US. Because we can attract the talent, we can attract everything. And be very aware of what being European means. For me, very, very much. So we need, as Peninsula, Iberian Peninsula, we need Europe to be more interconnected. But Europe, needs the Peninsula Iberia to fulfill your goals, our goals, in renewables, in electricity, energy efficiency, decarbonisation, electrification in the industry, and to take advantage of our talent and our capacities. And that's why I do support the TSO model as a great advantage for the European countries to fight against the dependency of energy that we still have. And that's it for the moment.
So do you think the Spanish government's going to make a statement about, creating fast-track visas for disheartened Americans?
So, sorry?
Will Spain create a fast-track visa system for workers from Americans who are disheartened? Okay, you're not the government.
No. I think.
Don't you think it's so obvious? There are so many disheartened Americans out there with lots of talent. Why not just give them a fast track here? And really put that in your mind and think about it. Why hasn't why haven't you lot thought about that? Or more importantly, the Commission thinking about how do you make sure that happens? Because if there's one way to create it, not that you want to create bloody noses, but hey, there are a lot of disgruntled, very talented people who welcome the opportunity to leave and make Europe the welcome home of values. Anyway, my point to you is only because you were saying about Europe is your model. And I've heard about it. You've spoken about it really well, and it sounds an excellent model. But we're all wondering about resilience of the model. You know where I'm going with this. Yeah. I know that you can't say a lot, but it'd be great in this audience, because everyone's scratching their mind, is that what happened in Spain and Portugal with the outage?
Well, there is an expert panel that is running now their job to deliver a report in, I think, in 2 weeks, the 3rd of October. And there is 2 more reports that have been delivered by the government first, and then for us, because we, as DSO, we have the mandate. The mandate is mandatory to deliver a report. And the expert planning coming for Europe, they have delivered more teasers of the report. And they have said that this is the first time in Europe that has happened an event regarding the control of voltage. Voltage control, this very strength, is the first time that has happened in Europe. What happened? Let me be crystal clear. Nothing to do with renewables. Nothing to do with the average of renewables into the grid. Because we, in Spain, we've operated a system with 80% or more of renewables without any problem. So it was not a problem about the infrastructures. The backbone was correctly functioning. It was not about the brain, because the incentives of our company, even the incentives for the bottom line or our financial seats, are to be efficient, are to be secure. So we have no incentive regarding the price of megawatts to don't do a good job. So what happened? This is please in our report, and you can get in English on the internet. So I'm not saying anything that is off the record or nothing. Was that some of the power plants that were connected to the grid in the moment of the blackout malfunctioned? So they did something that there were strains and create like a hair attack on the system. And then there were some of the generators that didn't fulfill the rule they have coming from our regulators in order to control correctly the voltage. I think if you think in a patient, it's like somebody didn't take the pills for the tension. And these pills are is a receipt that the regulator has already delivered 25 years ago. So the regulation was there, but they didn't fulfill it. Why? I don't want to guess, but they have, because it is their job, to have their incomes are depending on the prices of energy, and they have different incentives that we have. So let me say that the panel will say the last word, but please believe me, nothing to do with renewables. Renewables are not dangerous for Europe, are not. Well, we should invest more in grids, not only in new grids, but make grids more efficient, more intelligent, more smart, more digitalized. For example, we have talked about DLRs that are data line rating, dynamic line rating, with more software, with more technology, we can make grids more efficient, not more grids. And let me finish with a thing. When you deliver and you deploy grids, you are going through a territory where people live. And you must be very, very respectful for the way of that community's living. Not only because of the landscape, biodiversity, environmental, because they have their traditions, they have their architectural heritage, they have their way of economics, their agriculture, whatever. So we need to be very, very, very respectful to communities and ask them first.
Okay.
First, not after designing the infrastructures. And this is something that I think the regulators should have into account when they design the retribution system of the energy system in Europe.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be silent for the rest of the panel.
You don't need to be. Thank you for responding so effectively. And what's really important is you consistently repeating that this wasn't about renewables, it was something else. Because easily it could be say, see, it's not worth it. And I think it's important that everyone understands it wasn't about a renewable issue. It was something else that was taking place, which we can't name at the moment. And I won't go there. But there we go. We'll wait for the report. Let's go to the investment bank. Jean, it's really great to have you, Jean-Christophe. Tell us what you're doing, or what do you think needs to happen to make sure that it's not about the investability of the grid, it's about, is there enough money to do it?
All right, I'll come to your question, but first, hello to everyone. I'm representing the European Investment Bank. For those of you who wouldn't know us, we are the bank of the 27 member states. So a pure EU play. And I am running the team of bankers who are doing the business, the front line. That's my day job. Now, in my day job, and I come to your question, the question of energy has become central. I would say it's on a golden triangle, if you put it out there, with competitiveness and technology. And actually, those three things are connected. And in that context, indeed, in supporting the efforts of Repower EU, amongst other things, we have started doing much more on the theme of energy. Tribute to our partnership with IDEA, with Beatrice and her colleagues, we actually signed a loan to finance the interconnector between Spain and France. And I'm sure Martelt will talk about this. We need much more interconnection in Europe. But what we see overall is that there is indeed a much greater need of financing. And Martelt gave, I think, in one of the subcommittees of the Parliament, an estimate, I'm sure you will talk about it, an estimate of how much money is needed at present. But it's clear that we've seen a big evolution in our lending portfolio. We used to do 2.5 to 3 billion euros a year for the grids. Last year, we did 8.5, which is in a span of 3 years times 3, and that accounts for about 40% of all grid investments in Europe last year, according to our estimate. And that amount is going to keep climbing. Now, here is the question then, how are we going to finance all of this? And this is also where we can connect the dots with other parts of the European Union that we must complete. One of them is the Capital Market Union.
Yes.
You know, we are still very much relying in Europe on banks to actually provide the backbone financing for our economy. But it is clear at the moment that the banks are going to, even if, as you said, there are safe investments with large companies like IDEA that either have implicit or explicit support of the state, it is clear that at some point, with the accelerating investment pace, we are going to run out of fuel, we, the banks, including the EIB, by the way, on our ability to take individual exposure on transmission system operators, on distribution system operators, because you can't pile up finance to the infinite, right? We all have a certain limit in the concentration that we can have on single obligors, on single names, and also on a particular sector. So therefore, going forward, we're also going to have to find a smart way to transfer some of this risk into other players on the financial system. And this is actually where the Capital Market Union should, hopefully, progress and allow us to more easily transfer this type of risk from one type of investors, banks, to other types of investors, like, you know, institutional investors, pension funds, and others, who are actually who have got quite some appetite for these types of long-term investments. But at the moment, it is clear that it is very difficult for an institutional investor in country X to take a risk on assets in country Y in Europe, because the legislation is different, because it is very difficult for capital to actually transit and for this transfer of assets to take place. So at present, yes, there is enough money, but indeed, given the toweringly high amounts that we need, at some point we might run out of money from the traditional pockets of financing that generally serve that particular sector. We in the European Investment Bank have continued to stretch our balance sheet. We have announced a grids package also in the context of the initiative launched by the Commission. It's, by the way, not only the transmission system operators and the distribution system operators, it's the whole supply chain. Cable operators, for example, at the moment represent a real bottleneck. We've signed 250 million, I think, a few weeks ago to Nexans in attempting to also debottleneck the whole value chain. But it's clear that we have a systemic problem to get large amounts of finance through the whole value chain here.
Indeed. And so before you do put the mic down, have you considered alternative models? Because what you set out is your kind of straight direct route and let's put money into kind of great build capacity developments and connectivity. But every time you get a better grid connection and infrastructure, there's a saving to the public taxpayer, there's a potential saving to the customer, consumer, and a saving for the private sector. And that seems like right for a special purpose vehicle or a social impact bond or some sort of, pooled fund that operates with public-private partnership.
Well, it's an interesting idea, but we don't see it flying yet. We see some ESCOs, some companies specialized in financing actually energy investments through the savings actually made on energy efficiency mostly. But the model that you have just mentioned at the moment is not reflected yet in bankable projects, call it like that, or bankable operations. I think, honestly, part of the answer to that on how we will do it will also depend on the rate of integration of the market at European level. And at the moment, the market is still way too fragmented, where the prices actually still differing way too much from one region to the other, so that you can't, take the example of the Bay of Biscay interconnection. It brings Spain from 2.5% to 4% interconnection rate on the whole system with France. It's still too small to actually say that actually it brings uniformity also in the way prices are formed and in the way exchanges are happening. So it's very difficult to actually build a business model based on a very fragmented market on that.
Sure. And also the data, I suppose, is not there in terms of being able to really verify the savings and impact that might happen because it's measured so differently across countries. But, there's something about there might be a tourist map for energy in prices in Europe and say, actually, I'll go to Spain because it's cheaper rather than live in France. But, that's one of the traps of this situation we find ourselves. But
it's better weather as well.
Indeed. Bruno, good to have you back. Kent, a member of Parliament. Tell us what role you think the Energy Union has on this agenda, and how, from your reading of the politics at the moment, is there a sense of urgency taking place inside? You can take whichever way you want.
Well, that's many questions, but first of all, there is a tourist map of energy prices in Europe. Especially for electricity, I've only just seen it yesterday.
Really?
Yes, Acer has a very nice slide of it with prices, and one of the conclusions from that map is also the reason why we're having difficulties getting to agreements on investments. In the Nordic countries, electricity prices are spectacularly low. In Western Central Europe, they are pretty reasonable. In Southeastern Europe, they are literally 3 times the level that we have in Belgium. And in Belgium, we complain about high energy prices. And part of that is to do with lack of interconnection, lack of a market. But without an interconnection, you cannot have a market. And you cannot have alignment of the prices. And even inside countries, we have the same discussions. So every government has to justify towards its own consumers the electricity price. Even in Sweden, between the north and the south, there is a very bitter debate going on about the benefits of cheap electricity in the north that is not being felt in the south. So if you want one of the reasons, yes, making a uniform pricing or more uniform pricing will be very nice for some and slightly less nice for others. It will get to a general level which is cheaper for the average European, but it will not mean that everybody will automatically get lower prices. So yes, we need there a market and a way, and financial, especially for grids, ways to finance that, because one of the problems is that the same people who are paying electricity bills are also paying for the grids in the current model. It's one of the things we need to solve. I think we need to find, when we think of creative ways of financing grids, I think one of the things we need to think of is how do we get them out of the electricity bills of consumers and companies. And I think that should be obvious. We did exactly the same thing for the highways. And electricity grids are kind of the highways for our century. for transporting and creating prosperity. We never charged every individual a special kind of money. We never raised a highway tax all over Europe to build the whole e-road system. It's a public infrastructure for the benefit of all. So maybe we should think about getting that out of the cost and finding new financing models. And the funny thing is, you talked about fast-track visa for American bright minds. I think what we first of all need, and what we're already seeing, we need a fast-track entrance for their dollars. Because we are already seeing a move from investors that were in the United States, both in energy production, in renewables, and in infrastructure, money that is becoming available for us if we can provide them with a project that is both beneficial for us and profitable for them. And I think EIB can play a role in that, maybe through more through guarantees than through loans. But we need to find ways. There is money available, and it would solve the problem of the European internal market because it's external money. It's available. We can do that. So let's fast track their cash. The people are coming anyway. I wouldn't worry about that. But I do think we cannot emphasize enough that you mentioned the 7.2 billion. That's only half the story. It's worse.
Yeah.
Yes, because not only everyone is very, very educated, so everyone knows the infamous duck curve. We throw away 7.2 billion euros per year in free electricity at noon because we have too much. And at 6 o'clock in the evening, we buy billions of gas and oil from whoever sits on the American, Russian, or Saudi Arabian throne to turn the lights back on. Because then because we weren't able to store or to distribute that energy correctly. So we waste money twice. You don't need artificial intelligence, you just need common sense to know that that's not very smart. So that's because I only have common sense, I admit. So we need to make that more clear, that this is about our energy independence, it's about our competitiveness. We should stop calling the Green Deal the Green Deal. We should call it our Declaration of Independence. It's literally the only industrial project that will get us European competitiveness, and that will, instead of making us a vassal of one of other global powers, will make us a power. So we need to do that. We can get into the technicalities of money, but someone mentioned the discussion on the value chain. I'm literally just coming from a debate in the parliament on this value chain. I think there's a number of things that we can do. We are leaders in the world in production of cables, of transformers, of smart metering, of all that technology. What we do not have is ways to bring the cost down and to get that investment going. It's like looking at a tennis match. The producers, the manufacturers of all that material, they say we cannot scale up because you cannot guarantee the investment. The investors say we cannot guarantee the investment because you cannot supply it in the coming 4 or 5 years, be it a cable or a transformer. So we need to find ways to make a shortcut into that. That comes from, first of all, and I look at the Commission there, security of investment, certainty about the investment. We need to make sure that everybody knows that the demand will be there, that we're not going to buy and build hundreds of kilometers of pipelines for hydrogen that we don't have, but we're going to build electricity grids for electricity that we do have. That's number one. And second, I think we do need to look at, and that's more a matter for the TSOs, at a lot more standardization. Every individual TSO, every individual grid is a different technology, which complicates manufacturers, which complicates scaling up production, which creates situations where you cannot have interoperability and interchangeability, which is also a security issue, as we have seen in Ukraine in the past years, and which drives up the cost for no good reason. And so if we're looking at the grids package, certainty of investment, good planning of those investments, and for God's sake, please, standardization of equipment all over Europe to make sure that we can bring down the prices both of the grids and of the electricity, and both go hand in hand. It's simple. Everyone wants simplification. Well, that's simple.
No, sure, Bruno. You're always, you're good crack, as they say from Glasgow, in terms of your interventions. But common sense is common sense, right? But we also know that you can have these grand plans, yet it will be at the member state level where things get blocked. And we know that. Isn't there time to create a space where all 27 can play without feeling as if their sovereignty is being, knocked sideways? I'll leave you with that thought. But is there a possibility, both in terms of financing, but also some of the standard setting? Because you're not going to get all 27 to do it, but could you proxy it? Could you kind of prototype it with 3 or 4 and see if you can move things forward in that way? But think about that. Over to you. I've got the opportunity and possible time for 2 questions. Who'd like to grab the mic? Excellent, gentlemen there. And what about on this side? Great, 2 gentlemen. We'll go with that. Go on. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Anar Ahmedzadeh. I'm from Vienna and company Vanadium. We do AI, we do a private stack AI. And we talk a lot about data centers, but there is an alternative for an AI to grow, which is private stack. Now, all data centers, they belong to 9-10 big companies, and basically they're controlling everything. But there's an alternative future where they might have an AI. For small companies, everybody have their own AI. Meaning that back then there was one big computer of IBM. Now all of us have computers. So AI might go this way as well. Then the grid would be a critical investment and energy price would be much more important. And we need to create a competitive environment for the companies who's doing private AI like we do. Mm-hmm. And do we have a plans on this? And I think if we do it, the fast track visa won't be needed. They'll find a way.
It just make you think, if we were able to give birth to the euro and get the euro to work, and most economies, Belgium, when I speak to people and when I arrived, they said, it was the worst thing ever. Everything went up in price. Yeah, and you hear that story, but we've got the euro. Single market, less of a success. But yeah, so it's a good point you're making. Gentleman here.
Hello, so my name is Federico. I represent Energy Traders Europe, but I'm also the president of the European Youth Energy Network. But today I ask a question on behalf of Energy Traders Europe. I would like to bring a dilemma on the table, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I know it's a hard question, but at the moment, on one side, we have the need to integrate more and more, not just member states, but also third countries in the Energy Union. At the same time, we need to put a price on the carbon of the electricity that we import. And as we currently stand at 3 months before the go live of the CBAM, we know that the carbon price, the electricity imports will be overpriced in terms of carbon. And also there is not a clear, we talk about regulatory certainty, a clear framework for companies to import electricity. So the question to all of you, are you aware of the risk or of the challenges of the application of CBAM to electricity imports?
Would you do away with CBAM?
Sorry?
Would you do away with CBAM? Do you think it's just a silly idea?
No, I think CBAM is one of the greatest climate policy ever designed. It's my opinion. I've been working on this in the last year,
Sure.
and I've been very passionate. I think you want to achieve basically, you want to protect competitiveness. You want to promote the decarbonization in third countries. You want to push third countries in developing their own carbon price system so they don't have to pay for CBAM. So from vision to reality, the vision is great. The reality is very, very complicated. And I'm personally concerned that we won't be able to implement CBAM effectively as 1st of January 2026. So I'm not saying that CBAM should not apply to electricity import. It should apply. Just we need to work more on it so that it can apply a fair carbon price.
All right. I'm not going to ask all of you to respond to both those questions at this stage because there are things I know that other panelists are going to contribute, and you can perhaps wave them, and I'll provide the opportunity right at the end of the debate, because we've only got 27 minutes left, to work through that. But thank you both for your questions, and I promise I won't forget them and make sure people give you an answer. Mechtild, it's great to have you back. one of our regulars, and I mean that in the nicest way. And it's important. No, it's important to have you here. And you are, in a senior position, an important position, and it's good to make sure we've got this transmission and engagement. Where's the attention you're paying on the kind of grids package? What's your focus there? What are you going to be doing?
So first of all, I think our president spoke about energy independence, about homegrown renewables we need in the current context even more, and about grids and energy highways. So we have the highways. We already have them. We have a list of 8. And Southwest Europe is, of course, part of those highways, both on electricity, where we have some progress with Biscay Bay and 2 more to come, and also in the future hydrogen corridor. So in the upcoming grids package, what we want to deliver is that with 2 record years on renewables and all the congestion problems we have, and Draghi and others have highlighted them, that the grids are adapted to the future needs. And that can be, I would say, 4 objectives. Use the existing grids. I think we should always start and incentivize, modernize both transmission, but also even more so the distribution networks, which are 40% really old, so they need to be modernized. So use efficiently existing grids. Then the programming and planning, we want a European approach. For now, it's very much bottom up. We work with regional groups. One important one is Southwest Europe. Another important one is Southeast Europe. We have the North Sea, and we have Baltics, where we had made a historic step in February when the Baltics were synchronized with the continental Europe network and not anymore with Russia. So we want to continue in regional groups, but we want a European approach to see where are the clear bottlenecks. And that's very much linked to what has mentioned our work on affordable energy. So we want to reduce cost, and we see the difference between the different member states. And for now, we are, of course, out of this energy crisis and peak in 2022. But we have an issue in particular with Southeast Europe, where we have done some efforts since last year, August, but still not enough. So the European programming and planning can help to look at bottlenecks, needs assessment, and really define where the future needs are and also make them happen. The third one is still permitting. We learned a lot on renewables, and we have in our emergency regulation and in the renewables directive, and which unfortunately not all member states have yet implemented, but we are working on that with them. There's a lot on permitting, which we can do for renewables and grids. In a way, it's interlinked. So we will have certainly some proposal further down on permitting. And the fourth one is the cost sharing. We know that some of the costs occur in the country, like on the North Sea, but benefiting are also landlocked countries. So this cost sharing, which we are already having some proposals in the North Sea, we need to look more broader than that. It's technical, but of course political as well. These are the main items. Of course, we also look at cyber security and resilience, which is important, and supply chain issues, everything which was mentioned. But that, and we are aiming at coming out before Christmas, in December at the latest. Together with a communication on the highways, but also and grids priority, some guidance there, and most likely with a white paper on the future of the markets. So we will learn from the lesson learned from this unfortunate event where Beatrice was suffering and a lot of people suffering.
Yes.
But we can draw some lessons once we have all elements together. We are also waiting for the NSOE panel report and so on. So we can hopefully translate some of them. What we already know is that the repowering would have been faster for better connected countries. So interconnection, in particular in that area, but also in other areas, remain a top priority. I can take the CBAM electricity if somebody wants. So this is coming 1st of January. We are not in the lead, but of course we are working inside the Commission on how to make it happen. We know that the situation has slightly changed when we look, and I work a lot with the Western Balkan countries, Ukraine, Moldova. They have been doing a lot of efforts on decarbonizing, and we are pushing them very hard on the electricity market integration, which would mean benefits on the EU side, but also on the Western Balkan, Ukraine, Moldova, which are nearly all of them candidate countries. So we are looking at the practicality. It's complex technically, but also we are looking at the benefits, but on the same time, continue to push for decarbonization and electricity market integration. So there's an ongoing debate in the House, also with the countries concerned, UK is another one, how to solve that challenge.
Thank you very much for taking that. This is not for you to answer now, but there is this question about the temporal nature of change versus the reality that bites people every day. We know the prices are high at the moment, and we know that there are malevolent forces out there that are really manipulating people to say, move to the right, because actually this bunch doesn't have a clue. And my worry is that by the time we get a new white paper or something in place, we'll get such a shift to the right, unfortunately, unless we do something dramatic to... You know how COVID, we worked to create, opportunities for people to get money whilst they were being, unable to work. There has to be an opportunity whereby a kind of a lifeboat fund of sorts, so that those countries with the highest bills for taxpayers are somehow subsidized, because otherwise you will see definitely a shift, and you know that these players are really well organized and they know what the weaknesses are in the system. You don't have to answer that question now if you don't want to, but if you want to reflect, you can.
I think I can answer because it's partly social policies, because the energy price, it's more an energy cost issue, certainly for industry, but also for households. So there is something we had experienced in the COVID, definitely to help the energy poor, like we call them, but really suffering most. But then on the other side, we need the investments. EIB is doing a great work, and others in the sector. So there is something we are looking what can make the system cost bring down so everyone can benefit. And there are already some success stories we had in August last year in Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, peak hours. I mean, crazy prices after the sun came down. This year, it was much less.
Sure.
So we have already identified, but there's more to need to be done. It cannot all be done overnight.
No.
But, and then there's, of course, the social side and how to communicate to that, to people.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you in the sense that what I was really going on is that energy companies and also tech companies achieve the highest, this is not having a go at you, just reality, the highest profits in a period of 2 years that they didn't have in the 10 years previously. How much profit do you need as a company? What can governments do? Now, I'm not going to ask you that question. Don't worry, Google. But how do you do a kind of a community sense of payback? Because it was a taxpayer that underwrote Europe PLC. Yet it's a taxpayer now still having to burden the weight of high energy prices. Whereas there has to be a different kind of approach, surely a different mindset. Again, just putting it out there for you guys to even reflect on as well. But surely. But I'm not going to ask you that question more, don't worry. I'm really interested in, we heard from Adam in terms of the kind of opportunities AI presents. Do you want to add to that in terms of the work you do? Because you cover EMEA and digitalization and energy, energy in particular. What can digital do to support this transition, but also accelerate some of our work on the grid?
Yeah, absolutely. And happy to touch on the last question as well. But first of all, thank you for having us here today. Adam and Laura in the previous panel talked quite a bit already about how AI can help accelerate climate and energy across the value chain. So I'll start with maybe zooming in a little bit more on grids and what we can do for grids, but also what do we need from grids to get the future digital and AI industries that we need to rapidly grow in Europe right now from a global competitiveness perspective. Well, on AI applications for grids, I'll give you two quick examples to really give you a more concrete picture of where we can intervene. The first one is for grid operators. And we talked quite a bit already around data and virtualizations of the grid, and you must have heard about digital twins, kind of concepts as well. We think there's tremendous opportunity to really accelerate and make our grids much more agile from a decision perspective. At Google, we have a project called Tapestry. They're working on these digitalizations and developing new modeling softwares and forecast tools for grid operators to dramatically increase the speed of decisions and the right decisions on upgrades and in infrastructure investments. The first project is with PGM, which is the largest grid operator in North America. But of course, we hope to expand and apply those learnings very rapidly in our region here in Europe. Another example is closer to home. It's actually with Elia, our grid operator here in Belgium. And they've been using some of our AI cloud tools since last year to actually help forecast the carbon footprint, the carbon content of the electricity produced and consumed in Belgium. And that really helps the consumers, both large businesses, small businesses, but also end consumers like you and I, to make decisions on when do you consume, how do you consume, when do you charge your EV, for instance. And so that's really how do we engage not just the grid and you know all the policymakers that we have here in the room today, but really down to the customers. How do we bring them into this transition as well? And then beyond the pure applications and AI, tools and products for grids, I think as a rapidly growing industries, as large energy users, we do have this role, right? On like, what can we bring to the grids where we're operating? Yeah. And to your point today, it might be a bit contentious, but yes, Google and the others are huge profits and balance sheet. And you could say we could maybe buy our way out of that problem by, making ourselves. But today you don't build the data centers if you don't have the communities on board, if you don't have your whole energy supply chain on board with you from grid operators, but also we talked about, supply chain issues. Like there's only so much that will get you. And you really need to have this more ecosystem-centric approach to really develop those 20, 30 years infrastructures. And so for us, it starts with developing AI, but in a responsible manner. And so from a grid perspective, that means how can we get those new data center or factories to be good grid citizens? What is the value we bring to the local grids? So one, we talked about flexibility earlier this morning. This is a huge challenge. This is something that we have to figure out together. We started doing our own demand response programs in the first year, in the winter of 2022, 2023, when the war in Ukraine started, energy crisis spiked in Europe, and there was a lot of tension during the evening peak hours on the European grids. So we work with our local grid operators to try to schedule a reduction in our own compute demand in those regions to help mitigate the risk there. But we know we have to do more, right, as an industry. It is a technical challenge for us because it does impact how we operate, but there are many other tools as well, right, storage and other technologies. So how do we bring the right market tools to do that? And so I think for us, it's really also back to Commissioner Jorgensen's point this morning. How do we go quickly on things?
Yeah, what would be your ask? What do you need from government or the Commission?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the grid package. We see that as a huge opportunity to make some rapid leaps, basically, in unblocking some structures from commercial and regulatory perspective. The first one is, we talked about permitting. How do we build a grid faster? Digitalization of permitting process can really help streamline a lot of that. The second one, I would say, is really around more proactive, future-proof planning, which is how do we extend the time horizon when we look at grid planning and investments, but also how do we increase data sharing between grid operators and people like us, like large energy users. On one side, we can get to the table and provide more demand signal to help them plan where we see our demand going over the next decades. How can we set up that chamber of trust, basically, to share that? And then on the grid operator side, how can they publish more standardized capacity heat maps, right? How can they send us and generators and battery operators better signals to know where to go and how to make things simpler? That also resonates with things in the sense of like, how do we accelerate connection to the grids? Today, the big challenge for all of us is those grid connection bottlenecks, in the sense that we have across, again, the energy supply chain, generators, energy storage, EV charging, data centers. We all have a lot of applications for grid capacity. And there is this massive influx of applications for grid operators, and it's completely breaking down the processes as they used to exist. So we have to rethink those processes. We have to make sure that to some extent, they can filter some of the maybe more speculative projects, but they can also prioritize the ready-to-build, finance, bankable system ready to connect to the grid today. So how do we restructure that process together? And what are the right milestones, basically, to have filtering that? And then the last point I'll make is around, we talked about that a bit this morning, but how do we make the grid smarter, not necessarily just bigger?
Yeah.
We do have to build the grid, but today we can make it smarter with things like digital, we talked about that, but grid enhancing technologies, or GETs, huge potential. In certain grids, we see up to 40% more capacity we can get on existing lines from GETs in months, not just years of like building or restructuring your whole infrastructure. And one of the key blockers today is there are a lot of technologies available, but how do you bring more capital? How do you bring the large energy users who could benefit from that unlocked capacity to the table? And so that means co-investments, that means new commercial framework to work together on those projects.
Seems like you need a kind of it's not a war room mentality, but you need to bring together a kind of a sandpit of a member of parliament. You've got people that are working in actually national transmission authorities, you, Metil, and EIB, and a couple of others, to say, actually, let's sandbox how we might actually make ourselves a bit more resilient, and to join up the dots. Because what occurs to me right now is, but when you described it, is that the way in which the system is currently operating and the lack of connectivity and standardization, it's a sweetie box for a malevolent actor. They could just literally go boom, 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 boom. And I don't mean to use that word in that way, given the context of war, but I mean the sense that we are very vulnerable in terms of the security risks. Is that my assessment?
Yeah, I think the word for us is, for me personally, is how do we bring the ecosystem together? This notion of public-private partnerships. We do see some good ways to innovate in Europe. I think a good example is actually in Belgium with Elia and the local regulator. They have this concept of regulatory sandbox. We can come together and propose new options. And this is how you can bring grid operator, an energy supplier, and a consumer like us together, and to try to think through the solutions. And how does that translate into commercial structures that is a win for all the parties at the table?
If only that could be transferred elsewhere. Did you want to come in on that point, or did I catch your eye wrongly? You can do.
No, just one thought on that. First, to say it's very interesting, and very much to the question you asked me. I personally have not seen in any of the things we have undertaken so far such a model ready to be banked, actually. But it's very interesting to hear from Google that there is forefront thinking on that, and I'd be indeed very interested to be associated to some of the thinking. I couldn't help but think it is nice to have this public partnership collaboration at country level, but what would be really important is actually here to integrate it at public level, at European level first.
Indeed. Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just going to keep on fragmenting the markets more, because each market is going to develop on top of being fragmented from a price-setting mechanism, from a physical mechanism, from a standardization point of view. Each market is going to be fragmented in the way it interacts with the private sector, which is going to fragment the European market even first, even more. So it's really important that we actually bring all the European actors together and we try to think European from the beginning onwards, especially if there is the development of such models.
Exactly. So it's just showing you that's the beauty of hopefully you coming here, because you get to hear about a Belgium example. But that's not the real issue. It's about how do you scale or transfer knowledge. And I think the point you're making, Jean-Christophe, is that if there was an answer to Jorgensen, it's that take a lead on sandboxing in terms of standardization, and you'll get more wins rather than individual actions, and perhaps you'll accelerate things that are happening. I'm running out of time, and I do not want to not take our last but least speaker. Thank you for being with us. You've been doing a lot of work. You're, the director of the Energy Centre at Jacques Delors. You've been following the Letter report, obviously, very closely. Letter is the president of the kind of JDR of France, Paris. So, what's your sense about building on the point which are combining national budgets with European budgets to accelerate stuff? Do we have the mindset or the capability of doing that? And what's your assessment of where we are after the Letter report?
Well,
on grids and electricity.
Obviously, when Enrico Letta wrote the reports, he warned us about something. That following the war in Ukraine, following the COVID crisis, we were used to function in a crisis mode. And the risk was that we're going to go back to normal, to business as usual. But the world right now, as it is shifting away, showcases that we can't function as we used to. And in the last couple of years, in the last couple of decades actually, Europe have gone through certain shocks. With the debt crisis, migration crisis, recently COVID and energy price crisis. And every time we were told that this was a wake-up call. And every time we were promised that things would change. But little did change. Let me take a concrete example when it comes to internal markets. In 2011, member states asked the European Commission to complete the internal market by 2040. We are 10 years later. And the result is that it's still not completed yet. And we're not on the right track. So what have we done in the last couple of years? Well, in 2020, we managed for the first time to pool money together, to have a common date, to use money to answer an existential crisis. Climate change is an existential crisis and requires amounts of money that will need to be pulled together. So we need to go big on those matters. And when you look at what the European Commission has proposed in the proposal of the MFF, and I'm not saying that because Mercil you're here, but I believe we are going to the right direction. Let's take a concrete example. Let's look at the Connecting Europe facility envelope. It's going from, it's being multiplied by 5 times. But let's also look at what happened in the past negotiation. It used to be a proposal of 8 billion, and it finished at 5 billion. So nothing is set into stone yet. And what we need to do is to safeguard the ambition that is being put forward. Because if we apply the same mathematics, it will go from 30 to 20 over a 7-year time frame, which is definitely not enough, but it's still a good start. So in that regard, focusing on 8 highways is smart because it showcases to citizens that we have concrete projects that we want to deliver, that are going to foster solidarity and that are going to come live. But now, regarding the Letta report, something I believe is missing at the moment is the political willingness of member states to act. We talk about financing issue, and we have some innovative ways that we could put forward. Capital market union is a smart way, eventually common debt. We talk about social acceptance, permitting. If you manage to build a proper narrative that showcases that you're going to reduce electricity bills in the longer term, that you are going to have that being coupled with flexibility matters, storage solution, you could have a narrative. But member states, they're unwilling to commit on that matters. And this is what the Letta report was about. It was about establishing a diagnostic and making sure that member states would actually do something. Because ultimately, a bottleneck that happened in member states cannot be solved by the European Commission. Eventually, the European Commission or EIB can try to put more money into that. But if the permitting is not going fast enough, in the administrative authorization is not going fast enough, it's the member state's responsibility. So at the moment, one thing we could do is to try to make sure that the upcoming money that comes from the EU level will not be given to member states if they do not comply with the deadline that are being set. So if you decide to put forward, for instance, an electrification target to make sure that member states can actually stimulate them and have a business case to create those grids, make sure that you enforce the target by reducing the amount of money that a member state can benefit from at European level if it does not comply with those targets.
Indeed.
Carrot and sticks.
Sure, and I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you on the carrot and stick. But all I'm minded of is how consistently Orban sticks two fingers up at the EU's proposals and say, "Come on, try it on." And we haven't managed to deal with that, a lack of ill discipline. And so my issue is that that's an area that we need to think about, is that if we are going to move on this agenda, what we do know is it's the council that matters. It's the member states that matter. And the one lesson we learn from history is that when you had adversity of the scale of COVID, it didn't matter about state aid. Joint procurement, money, going on the money markets, raising money. And it changed the power dynamic between the EU to a certain extent and member states, because suddenly, EU became a banker of sorts. But what it failed to do, and all hands are shaking, is really apply conditionality. So the RFF has gone out in hundreds of billions, but it's still not spent fully in member states. So final points from each of you, if you wish to, as I need to close off. So Jean-Christophe, because you were shaking your head, and it's that point.
Just wanted to comment on what you said. It didn't matter about state aid. Actually, the COVID's proved that we could indeed overcome some of the barriers and indeed communalized borrowing. But behind that, we had state aid, actually, where the rules were relaxed, and you could see a huge difference between member states, with 2 member states actually granting 75% of all the state aid, which fragmented the European market even further. So just wanted to put that in perspective.
Indeed. I suppose costs and benefits, and whether the benefits outweigh some of those wranglings. Bruno?
Yeah, one short point. There's many I could make, but one short point, since you came on COVID, I think the big difference between COVID and what we are facing here is that COVID was a completely new, unexpected situation where everyone was discovering, as we were going, solutions to a problem that we were discovering what it is. It was kind of a blank sheet that we worked on. The problem with electricity, coming back to electricity grids, the problem with electricity grids is that we have a very long legacy of individual countries with individual systems, with individual TSOs, with ingrained cultures, with ingrained technologies, with old habits and old financing structures that all need to be overcome. And I'm very much for being very voluntaristic and very pushy and going very hard. Mm-hmm. But I do think we need to take into account that there is a breaking point where they will just start ignoring you. Which is why I believe that the whole idea of starting to work on regional levels in southwestern, southeastern, North Sea basin, Baltic basin, is a good step, because it's already happening. Actually, it is TSOs that are already cooperating, that are already investing in, to a certain extent, in joint management systems, joint investment vehicles, and you name it, and where lessons can be learned. Mm-hmm. I think the idea of we'll just make it all in one European space all at once is not very realistic. Whatever sandbox you're going to discover, I think there's many sandboxes going on, but you need some levels where you can get started. And Elia has been named a couple of times. I think they are one of the partly because they're also active in Germany, because they own 50 Hertz. So they have a view on the different scale and the different levels and the larger scale issues. But that is not the case for all the dozens or hundreds of DSOs in Germany, for example. So I think you have to realize that the landscape is completely different. And you talked about subsidizing electricity prices. It's happening right now. I mean, the French have been doing it for 20 years, which is one of the reasons why there's no interconnections. Let's be honest about the reality.
Yeah, sure. I suppose our point of view is that someone needs to have an overseeing role of some of these sandboxes and making sure there's cross-pollination. Otherwise, it's the free market in a different way. And at some point, we need to get a grip on the grid, if you like. But on that note, what worries me is what we've witnessed. And whilst the investigation continues, we've seen what's happened in Berlin, and we know what's happening in different parts of the east of Europe. I just fear that malevolent outages of our system will only create more hate and division. And perhaps it will be that moment when you say about COVID, it's equivalent in the sense, I was told vivid stories of what's happening in Lisbon and elsewhere where people were queuing because there was no money in the system. And there was the most horrific scenes of people, regardless of their background, could not buy stuff for their kids or for their families, etc. And just bear that in mind when we think about the fact this is not COVID. You just need about 3 malevolent attacks in big centres that create that urgency. But I don't want to leave you on that note because, there is happiness in the system. The happiness is that, what you've witnessed today is there is a sense of capability, there is a sense of ideas, and we're not short of good human endeavour and wanting to do the right thing. It's damn politics that always gets in the way, as ever, which never changes. No, not your fault at all. You're a good person in the system. I'm talking about the council. And at some point, at some point it has to tilt in the right direction. Thank you all very much for your contribution. Thank you in the usual fashion.